Hi everyone, this is Tim. Welcome to North and South Podcasts. This is a history podcast. I haven't had one of those for a while, and it's a real honour today to introduce Tom Clark, who is 59 and is the brother of my mum. So he's my uncle, and you are my mum's younger brother, Tom. And you were born in which year?
1963.
What a great year that was.
Vintage year.
Vintage year. I think, didn't Everton win the league in 1963?
Sure did, yeah.
Cool.
There was a few bad things that happened as well in 1963, but I don't know if we want to go into that.
Well, Kennedy was shot.
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis died the same day as Kennedy, didn't he? I believe.
Oh,
A few other bits
okay.
and bobs. Cool. But anyway, this is going to be a history podcast. It's a bit of a family history, but Tom has been to France recently and over to Dublin, and he went to a few places I've never been before, and a lot of you might have been to these places, but it was just very interesting, our discussion, so I thought I'd record a history podcast about it. Please follow me on Twitter at North Podcasts. If you can give me a small donation each month for the price of a cup of coffee, go to coffee.com. Details in the notes. If you want to come on to talk about history, politics, well-being, creativity, financial literacy, cost of living crisis, join the party. If you want to come on and help me in any way, great. If you know people who you think it would be good to get on, please get in touch if you know me or through Twitter. Although this is a history podcast, we might talk a little bit about some family history as well, which is history, and I've had 3 history podcasts with family members. So Tom is now on my mum's side. I spoke to Frank, who is my dad's brother. So Tom, you're one of 11 children, and I think it was a bit of a mad situation growing up. I think that for people today who tend to live in much smaller families, being one of 11, it used to be considered quite normal, didn't it? But in Bootle, there was lots of Irish immigrants came to Bootle, and there was still a thing about having large families right into the 20th century. So what was it like in your home when you were little?
Well, I was the 10th of 11 kids. I was the baby boy, wasn't I?
Yeah.
I have to say, thinking back on it, it was actually quite crazy. It was a crazy situation with the sleeping arrangements and beds all over the double beds and in rooms and things. So yes, it was quite mad actually. 7 sisters, 3 brothers. Absolutely mad, yeah.
Crazy times. Of the 11, only one of them is no longer with us, and me nan and granddad haven't been with us for a while. I took my lad down to see the grave actually and was telling them the story. He's nearly 3. So when I went down to Bootle Cemetery the other day, there's some good war monuments in there as well to the people who died during the Blitz. There's a monument in there, and then there's a general Blitz monument, and there's quite a few war graves, memorials in Bootle Cemetery, which is very, very interesting. Yeah. And people out there, there's history near you, your family history, the history around you, can actually be very interesting to go into your local area and see things that maybe you wouldn't have noticed before. But this is a particular interest to me, family history, and it's something I want to get down recording wise for posterity, and also just to get the information out there, and hopefully other people find it interesting as well. So Tom, you've recently been to France and Ireland, and I've been to Dublin. I've been around France, I've been to some interesting places, but although you go to Paris, I've been to Paris before, it's not the kind of place you do in 1, 2 or even 3 visits. It's a bit like London. There's that much going on in Paris that there's always different things to see. I haven't actually been to Paris, the city centre as it were, for I think it was 2001, so I'm due another visit to Paris, and you've definitely given me a few ideas for what to do when I'm there. My granddad, you said, just talking before we came on, you remember he was a mine digger and a sapper, so he was the first in and the last out during the war. He fought in North Africa, but he didn't speak much about it, did he? He wasn't really proud of it. And that's something I got from him when I used to speak to him when I was younger. He wasn't really proud of what happened. He just said, that's what happened. And you said that he used to talk about how to take mines, excavate a mine without it going off, etc. What did he tell you about that?
Well, that's right. He didn't really like to talk about his war days that much, to be honest. But on one of the few occasions when I did ask him about it, my question to him was, okay, so how do you dig up a mine? And his answer was, very gingery.
Yeah, very careful. I watched a film recently where they got captured German soldiers at the end of World War Two, young lads, and their job was to do a beach and demine it.
Yeah.
And it links in actually to what we're going to discuss about Omaha Beach in a minute, but the Nazis mined the beaches of France, northern France, extensively in anticipation of the second front opening on the western front, but we'll come to that in a minute. So anyway, you went to Paris recently, and you went to Versailles. Now, I've never been to Versailles, but what's it like? It's quite a way out of France, out of Paris, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about an hour's drive, or just under an hour's drive from Paris. It was fantastic, Tim. I've heard all about the gardens and the palace of Versailles since I was since I was a boy at school. And to get the opportunity to go and have a look firsthand was fantastic. It was great, we're walking around and you see the opulence of the royalty, and it's in stark contrast, wasn't it, to the peasants.
Yeah.
And it really was nice, and outstanding rooms like the Hall of Mirrors was particularly good.
That's where they signed the Versailles Treaty, wasn't it, at the end of the war?
It was.
And I think that Versailles, did they have lots of history in there? Like, to do with the history of it, it's not just a place you go and look at, there's lots of history to read about it as well, isn't there?
There's lots of plaques up on the wall and bits of information and all that stuff, So you're not lost for information as you're walking around.
One thing I remember about Versailles, it used to be a hunting lodge,
Yes.
and it was Louis XIV who built it basically to get out of Paris, because he had frondeurs. There was uprisings called the Frondes before it was built, and he had violent protesters break into his bedroom with his mum. So he wanted to get away from Paris and say, I'm out here, I'm special.
Out the way, 20 miles away.
And I can't be threatened. And he spent a lot of money on it, and as you said, in stark contrast to what a lot of the peasants do. And that was the idea. It was meant to be the symbol of this divine king. He considered himself put there by God, and often it's attributed to him, the Sun King, that he said, "L'état c'est moi," I am the state, which people think he might not have actually said. And people describe him as being what we call an absolute monarch, where all power is invested in him. Even though that word didn't really exist at the time, it was meant to be a beautiful, dazzling place that took people's breath away. And anyone who came there, particularly the nobility, who we wanted to keep in check, would be, their jaws would hit the floor, and he had the meat out of his hand, literally. They helped him to go get dressed in the morning, etc.
Yeah, but it would impress anybody, that building and the gardens.
Yeah. How tall is it? Is it like in comparison to the Gyro building, which isn't far from our house, is it taller than that, or is it about the same?
I would say that's probably a similar comparison, actually. It's about in size-wise, something like the actual palace itself. You could say it was about the height of the Gyro, So.
People around the world listening to this, I'm sure there's lots of them. The Gyro's about like 15, 20 stories, isn't it? So it's not a small building. Everyone knows where the Gyro is. Although people from back in the day, we used to call it the Gyro building after the Gyro Bank, but it's now owned by Santander, isn't it? So the youth of today call it something different. So Versailles, it's a place I want to go to, and a very dazzling place, as it were. Right, you then went to Normandy, which used to be a part of the British Empire, not just dating back to the time of William the Conqueror, etc., when the Normans came over here, but the English ran huge swathes of north and western France, going back through the Middle Ages, etc. But you actually went to see the Bayeux Tapestry. Now, Bayeux itself looks like a lovely little town. You showed me some pictures earlier. What was it like there, going to that place? Is it quite a small town, Bayeux?
Yeah, Bayeux is quite a small town. A very nice drive over there as well, to that part of France. And the actual town itself is very picturesque, I would say. With the mills, the water mills, and the little river running through. And the actual buildings themselves are all very quaint, and a really nice town, Bayeux.
Yeah, I've been to a few of them French towns, and I've driven around parts of the battlefields of the Western Front from World War One, and there's just these little towns. I actually went through Agincourt, which was quite interesting. And the countryside is just absolutely beautiful. and you'll drive for a bit through the countryside, and then it just get to this little quirky town, lots of stone, lots of, as you say, water wheels and rivers, and the architecture's absolutely beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
So to see the Bayeux Tapestry then, I mean, I'm a history teacher, I've always taught the Bayeux Tapestry and spoken of it. What's it actually like to see? Because it's something that people know about and you've seen lots of images from it, but to actually see it, was that a bit of a strange experience?
Well, I done French show level at school, you know, so the Bayeux Tapestry was often brought up in school during lessons, you know. I think there was even an attempt to go and see it at the time as well, but I didn't go. I don't know whether that happened in the end or not, but I didn't go. But I've spent now 40 years since I left school, like thinking, I'd like to go to Bayeux and see this tapestry, you know. So it was nice to actually get the chance to do it this year. And it was everything I thought it would be. It was fantastic. The museum itself was a nice museum, but the actual the thrill of witnessing and seeing it with my own eyes was fantastic. And the amount of detail of the embroidery and the stitching is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Tremendous. And it gives you a feel more of anything, more than anything to look at. The visual is great, but it's more of the story behind it, how it was made and why it was made, and all that side of it was really comes to the fore when you're in there.
Yeah, it's definitely something I'd like to visit, and it was apparently made in England.
I think it's a little bit controversial, but I think most people think it was made in England.
Yeah. There was a documentary about it recently, actually, which I didn't watch. I probably should have tried to catch it before we did this, but the skill involved and the time it took to do it was staggering. And as you say, you might look at it and go, it looks a little bit limited, like, you know, pre-Renaissance figurines, etc., not drawn to scale.
Yeah.
But it was very much about the meaning of the story rather than, you know, exact precision or replication of reality. That's not what those things were about back then. That came later with the Renaissance. But the story of the Bayeux Tapestry, you know, it talks about why the Normans came over, the Norman invasion, how it went. And it's also an important primary source because it tells us stuff that happened or was explained to have happened according to the Norman narrative after the invasion. But it is a very significant piece of memorial and, some argue, propaganda, etc., of what happened at the time. And how long did it take you to go look at it all?
Well, when you go in, it was like it's just a line of people actually. So it's behind a glass case, obviously. And it's about I'm not sure how many. Very long though. When I was at school, I thought it was like a piece of cloth that you hang on the wall or something, you know. Yeah. But to actually see it is 70 odd meters or something. So it takes a few minutes to go down. You've got the audio on as well, giving you the explanation. So you just got to move on as the audio moves on to the next part of the tapestry. You know, you move along, but it's dictated by who's ever in front of you, really. You know, so but if everybody's moving at the same speed, really, it should be. You know, you should be in the right place at the right time when the audio comes on. Yeah,
because it is quite an extensive story, isn't it? With the build up to the Battle of Hastings, then the actual battle itself, and then, you know, what came.
Yeah, well, I was interested in the actual build up to the battle itself. There was a bit of a story about, in fact, Harold and William were sort of, I don't know about friends, but they were acquaintances before that, weren't they? And Harold actually done the dirty on William, which is led to the relationships went bad after that. Well, I didn't know about any of that, and there's other things as well that became apparent just through walking along and listening to the story. Yeah, and it was fantastic, actually.
Yeah, no, it is interesting because apparently Harold was shipwrecked in Normandy, and William gave him his protection. And Harold said, "I swear on holy relics that you can be the next king of England," because it was clear Edward the Confessor was getting on and he wasn't going to marry. But then, of course, Harold found himself being the guy there in the right place at the right time, and that led to the Battle of Hastings. But I mean, Harold defeated Hardrada as well, who came over at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, and he had a very depleted army at Hastings, and the idea of staying up on the shield wall on the hill, you know, it nearly paid off really, and things could have been very, very different. The interesting thing about those battles as well is apparently, like, you know, if you were like a couple of miles away, you would have been oblivious to it, that there was a few thousand men fighting 2 miles away, and that decided the fate of the country. That was, and if your leader got killed, like, there was a rumour during the battle that William was dead apparently, and he showed his face and said, "I'm still here." Once the leader was gone, that was it. People tended to run away, and it was often at the end of the battle when the people were running away that most of the killing took place.
Get chased down.
You'd think, if we kill these now, we won't be dealing with them again in the future, kind of thing. And that was our medieval battles. It's very hard for us today to think about what it was like, because they sustained an injury in a battle back then, the way they used to fight. I mean, it's not like you can take a course of antibiotics or anything like that, but I mean, I suppose that was part of the masculinity of it all, particularly amongst William's knight class that he brought over. But, I mean, Harold's army was heavily depleted at Hastings.
I can only imagine the brutality going on the battlefield, you know. You can say that about any battle, can't you? But, you know.
I think it's the face-to-face nature of it that's different to war today, because a lot of it's, you don't see people today, do you? And it's a different concept. I mean, that's why a lot of men went mad in the war, the First World War. They were stuck in a trench, they couldn't move. Whereas on a medieval battlefield, you can say, right, we're here, the battle lasts less than a day, and then afterwards, you know, if we're still here, okay, we deal with the situation or whatever. But I remember reading about Gettysburg. Gettysburg was one of the first huge battles that like lasted across 3 days, you know, that kind of, during the American Civil War.
Is it Pennsylvania?
I think it is in Pennsylvania, just slightly north of the line between the Confederacy and the United States at the time. But I've never been. I've spoken to someone who went actually and said it's phenomenal, just the sheer geographical scale of it all. But that's an interesting war, really, the American Civil War, because in many ways it was like the first modern war where huge numbers of men walked into bullets, as it were.
Death.
Within a country where civilians are caught up in it all as well, because it was a civil war, you know, it got nasty. I mean, do you reckon when Germany had, during the 30 Years' War in the 17th century, do you reckon the German economy was shattered for 300 years? It was only Bismarck who got the German economy going after, because the whole war, well, not the whole war, but a lot of it was fought in Germany. Civilians just got absolutely decimated. What William did after the invasion as well, with his like harrying of the north, he was absolutely ruthless. But again, that was what it was all about back then, the ruthlessness of the leader. But definitely a place I'd like to go to. Another place I'd like to go to, and we used to watch Saving Private Ryan, didn't we, 20 years ago, is Omaha Beach. That was one of the 5 D-Day beaches, wasn't it? So you went to Omaha Beach, where the D-Day landings took place in June 1944. So Stalin was onto the West, wasn't he, the United States and the British government, to open up a second front, or at least a northwestern front in the war in 1942, 1943. They eventually got round to it, and they landed on Omaha Beach. What's it like there today? Is it, you know, I'm just thinking that, is it just literally a beach, or is there stuff on the beach to remind you that you're on Omaha Beach? I know there's a museum there.
Well, it looks remarkably like any other beach, to be honest. But there is a few, you know, tributes to the men who died on the beach itself. It's like a big a modern art shape monument on the beach itself, on the sand. I'm not exactly sure what that's supposed to signify. Actually, it's got a strange shape. Maybe I'll look into that. But so it looks remarkably plain, actually. But I had an overwhelming feeling of sadness and somber feelings, you know, just because I realised, or I knew what had happened there in the past, maybe 70 years ago. Like, but that still felt fresh to me. That feeling, even though it looks like an ordinary beach, you can feel I was looking around looking for bits of stains, blood stains and stuff like that, like thinking, you know, I know that was never going to happen, like, but that was the way my mind was. I was completely back in 1944 in my mind. The whole day it took me back to 1944.
There's a strange sense I got when I went to Auschwitz. I don't know if you've been to Auschwitz, but when I went into Auschwitz 1, which was the old barracks, which looks like a barracks and doesn't look particularly bad as a place, but when I went to Auschwitz 2, Birkenau, I had an unbelievable feeling as we approached on the bus. You see those gates with the train tracks going in, and it was only then that it hit me. Now, I want to do a podcast on the Holocaust separately because it's just something that I've been reading a bit about. Not what the Holocaust was, but how it happened in my own head. I just couldn't get my head around it. But when you go to these places, there's a strange feeling you get in certain places, which I got at Auschwitz of I just couldn't get my head around it. And it actually took me about... I've become more reconciled to it recently after I read a great book about Auschwitz or about the Holocaust called Ordinary Men, which I'll come to when I do the Holocaust podcast. But you got that feeling on Omaha Beach because you knew the brutality of what happened.
Well, I recognise that feeling that you're talking about from Birkenau as pretty much what the feeling I was getting on Omaha Beach on that day. I would say it was a similar feeling.
Now, I heard that on the other 4 beaches, and it's always a quiz question, this, isn't it? Like, can you name the 5 beaches? So let's do that. You've got Omaha, Utah, Juneau, Sword, and Gold.
Yeah.
I think. But Omaha, obviously there were code words, etc. There was an extensive beach on Normandy, and they did quite a bit, the Allies, before they invaded, to throw the Germans off. So there's been a film made recently where they put papers on a body to make them think that it was going to be elsewhere, and the Germans bought it to a degree, and the Germans thought it might be like in various places. But a lot of the defenders were just young lads, weren't they? But they were in very well protected machine gun
towers,
turrets and bunkers with an overlook of a beach.
3 foot thick concrete.
Yeah.
But, well protected, yeah.
But the guy, I saw a guy actually, he was 17, he was taken prisoner, and he said like he was shooting at people on the beach, and he said this is ridiculous, this has got to stop. Because they reckon about 2,000 people were shot on Omaha Beach that day. Yeah. And it was like, they got out the boats, they came up close, and as soon as they were in range, they were like just sitting targets. Now, it's also meant to be the case that a lot of the tanks that were meant to be landed on Omaha Beach, there was a problem out to sea, and what they were floating on, a lot of them went down and sunk.
Yeah.
So they didn't have the tank protection that might have allowed them to get closer to the bunkers, but eventually they did it just because of sheer determination. And if you haven't seen the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan, which is like, it's controversial because a lot of people walked out because of the graphic nature of it when it was on in the pictures like 25 years ago or whatever it was. Yeah. But, you know, obviously it glamorises it focuses on a few characters who are immensely brave, etc. But how big is it? I mean, obviously tide's an issue. How far is it from the beach to the machine gun bunkers?
Now, this was something that particularly interested me, Tim, because when I went up to the turrets, the gun turrets, and you were right, you were talking about, like, they were quite, you know, there wasn't a lot of Germans there, was there, soldiers? There was just like two in each turret. You could be talking about a few dozen men killing thousands of men on the beach. So they were like, they were back a few hundred yards, weren't they? I would say a couple of hundred yards from where the beach starts. But they were up in the hills as well, up in the hill. I'm not sure if the layout is exactly the same nowadays as it was then. But I would say it was a perfect position to shoot people if you were sitting up in them hills, you know, and just people, swarms of people coming in. It was like a turkey shoot, wasn't it? It must have been a turkey shoot. Yeah. I could imagine it just being death and, you know, people wondering when they were going, when it was their turn to get it next, you know.
Must have been a strange feeling for the ones who landed. As you're landing as well, what are you feeling just before you go onto the beach? I mean, even on the other 4 beaches, like, what kind of sensation have you got? Yeah. You can think about it and go, yeah, you'd be nervous and all that, but...
Well, it's like on that film you've been talking about to me now. I would imagine there was a lot of bravado at first and all the rest of it, until the bullets start whistling over your shoulder and fizzing through the water right next to you, and I'm sure that made people think about it a bit differently.
Yeah. Now, my granddad, your dad, fought in North Africa. He was away for 5 years, wasn't he? He got quite a bad shrapnel wound on his back, didn't he?
Yeah.
During a bombardment from German forces on the north coast. I think it was Tobruk.
Yeah.
So he was a desert rat, wasn't he?
Well, he was at El Alamein.
Yeah, and he was there as well at that big tank battle. That was quite. It wasn't as big a swing as people make out, but Rommel was a big risk taker. But eventually, the British, basically just through sheer logistics and playing the percentages, overcame them. But bullets just going in slightly different directions. We're not here doing this discussion, you know what I mean? And I think that I think it's hard as well for the soldiers, particularly with the rifles and the guns, is you can't even see who's doing it to you.
Yes.
And that's different about modern warfare.
Yes.
Compared to the past where, you had archers and stuff, but the psychology of war, it's something that you just don't fully appreciate, do you?
Well, the other thing as well, Tim, is that it's indiscriminate. The German soldiers, they're just hitting the trigger and spraying everything on it. They're not particularly. So that's indiscriminate as well, you know what I mean? It's not like, I don't think they were particularly aiming for individuals. It was just a question of hitting the trigger and spraying the beach and watching them fall.
Yeah, and saying, if these get up to me, I'm in trouble. So if you're a 17-year-old lad, caught up on that. But phenomenal. So the beaches, there's some monuments there, but the museum is just to the rear, and that tells the story more fully, doesn't it, about Omaha?
Yeah, well, I went into the museum. The museum was fantastic, with lifelike size characters operating on machinery, and they had real bombs there on display, and it was all authentic stuff, wasn't it? So that was really interesting to see all that. That gave me a bit of something to think about as well. What was going through soldiers' minds. I've always thought like that anyway. How were they thinking when this was happening? But when I go to something like that, the Omaha Beach Museum, that really brings it home to me. Just how hideous the whole thing is hideous, isn't it? War.
I always remember my granddad saying that our Ambrose's generation, who's your eldest brother, my mum's eldest brother, they were the first generation not to go to one of these wars, because obviously my granddad, the First World War was still a big feature in people's minds. Before that, you've got the Boer War. To an extent, then there might be a little bit of a gap back to the Crimea, etc. But then the Napoleonic Wars. But that kind of thing we've had since World War II, this kind of what they call the global peace with local breakouts, it does mean that soldiers are needed less as well because of the kind of technology that's involved. I know, if you're in a developing country, a lot of civilians will be getting caught up in war still. We know what's going on in Ukraine at the moment, which is, brings things home that, we will never have war in Europe again, and it happens, but there's still a lot of lessons to be learned. You also went to Mont Saint-Michel, which is interesting because I read a lot about the 100 Years' War. I'm particularly interested in that, but that's an abbey. It's a defensive castle and abbey on a small island off the coast of Normandy.
In the bay.
Yeah, in the bay.
Well, I think it's a monastery, I think.
Yeah, no, it is. It's a religious site as well, because they used to do pilgrimages there. But it was never taken by the English in 100 years. The English took over Normandy extensively.
Not through lack of trying, Tim.
Yeah, well, apparently they could have survived sieges for 30 years because of the defences, and apparently in the 13th century they did build up the defences, but it's quite a spectacle to look at. I've seen pictures of it, but again, is it something that because of its distance it makes it look even more beautiful because it's on this island just off the coast?
Yeah, it's very picturesque. It's lovely to look at, actually. When you see it, when we were driving towards, we got a few 5 miles away from it, you can see how beautiful it is from miles away, And as you get closer and you park the car and you walk towards, quite a walk, it's a 30-minute walk on the, it's like a temporary road, isn't it? It goes over the marshes and where the tide comes in and all that there. They've stopped people driving up to it now. I believe you used to be able to drive right up to it, but they've stopped all that now. They just have shuttle buses taking people back and forward. It takes 10-15 minutes, back to the car park. Yes, it was absolutely beautiful to look at from a distance, and just as beautiful to look at close up when I got inside.
Can you get across in the daytime? Is the boats over
Yes,
there? Or?
yes, you can walk. When the tide's out, you can't just walk out. You have to be on a guided tour. You have to have a guide with you because the tide's too ruthless. I'm sure people have been caught out in the past. So you have to be part of a group with the guide. We didn't actually do that, but we did have a walk around, right around the rock that the monastery is built on, the actual, the island itself. While the tide was out, and that was beautiful, and you can see it from different angles. Really nice. I just wonder at the workmanship that went into that place. And it was actually started, like in the 7th century that was started. Sorry, the 8th century, it was 715 it started. It was the first foundations were put in, which that's quite an undertaking, I would say, building something like that. Working around the tide and the location. Getting your materials up there must have been an absolute nightmare. But they actually had a big a hoist. A hoist. It was a massive, like a hamster wheel at the top. Now it was at one point as well. This place was used as a prison, so you would have prisoners walk the wheel, walking or running in the wheel to turn the wheel, which would pull the rope up with the supplies like a crate, so right up to the virtually to the top of the building itself. And you can see the wheel, and you can just imagine what that was like for 18 hours a day walking a wheel like that to pull things up, all the supplies.
It's incredible that when you think about what people do and they can set the heart to something. I think a lot of it as well, like if you look at religion, it's a big driver of things. When there's a special site, they build these beautiful buildings. And the Normans brought that architecture over with the Norman invasions as well. There's the French cathedrals and the churches were beautiful. They brought that in and changed the country. Going back to the Bayeux Tapestry and the Norman invasions, it was the last successful invasion of England. And it completely changed the country in terms of the social systems, etc. But absolutely incredible what people do and what they used to be able to do in the past. And I don't know if you've been down the Williamson tunnels in Liverpool.
I have, yes, just last year.
For those who don't know, that these tunnels were built after the Napoleonic Wars to employ men for no other reason than to apparently just give men jobs into these tunnels that go underneath parts of Liverpool. Some of the modern builders are completely clueless how they did it, and knowledge is often lost as well from generation to generation, which is quite incredible too.
Well, he would be quite a character, that Mr. Williamson, I would say. For the time he lived in, like a Victorian businessman, and he looked after people, didn't he?
Yeah,
his workers, actually.
Yeah,
like the other fella, Lord Lever as well over him.
Yeah, that's a nice little town, that little village over on the Wirral. Is it
Port Sunlight?
Port Sunlight, yeah, little village. So he was a philanthropist.
The rabbit trousers, yeah.
He was a philanthropist, and he built a beautiful little town village, didn't he?
For his workforce, actually, yes. True. Fantastic.
Have you been to the museum recently?
I was there in the museum last summer,
yeah. It's nice. I went over about 3 years ago to see something, but that is a nice little museum.
It's a nice museum.
Yeah. There's a U-boat over the water as well.
Yes, I've been to the U-boat. I went to the U-boat about 10 years ago. I think it's been moved from when I first seen it. It was like just there in Birkenhead, but it's being moved now to somewhere else.
Yeah, I'm going to take my son to see that when he's a bit older, because he likes boats and stuff. But for those who are out there who don't know, when people from Liverpool say across the water, you refer to the Wirral Peninsula.
That's the wheel.
Really, at the top of the Moss.
Yeah. There's the road going down. Just goes outside the window down, straight down. Like a little
Tom's just showed me a picture of the wheel that the unfortunate prisoners of Mont Saint Michel used to pull the supplies up like a hamster wheel.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. Anyway, you go back to Paris, you went to the Rodin Museum. Now, I've seen some Rodin in Cardiff Art Gallery, which was beautiful, but what was the museum like? Seeing some of the big pieces of Rodin's fine sculpture,
yeah. Well, actually, I don't really know a lot about Rodin, or I know more now than what I did a month ago. Somebody suggested that I go to have a look. I mean, all I know about Rodin is the thinker, and La Baise,
The
the Kiss, and Le Penseur is the thinker. So they're the two I know about, and I've heard about the burgers as well of Calais.
Yeah.
But I went. It just shows you, like, when you go around these things. I know a lot more about the burgers of Calais now, and I know a lot more about lots of things that Rodin was involved with.
Yeah.
He had was it his wife or his mistress, his girlfriend? I'm not sure who she was, but she was a big influence on his life, and would direct him towards certain kinds of sculptures or art, and he had a lot of faith in her opinion, Because I should know her name really for this, but I cannot think of what it is now.
You said as well, I was surprised you were how modern. He was like 19th century,
yes.
wasn't he?
No, I thought he was from a few centuries old, and I always thought he was like 300, 400, 500 years ago, with the Michelangelo and what have you. But no, it was he was still alive 100 years ago, so he's fairly recent, fairly modern, isn't he?
There's hints of impressionism about his work as well.
Yes.
That kind of like the way the light reflects, etc.
Oh, he's certainly got his own style. He's got his own little way of doing things as whether it be sculpture or.
But the powerful pieces, aren't they? The Burgers of Calais, I mean, again, going back to the 100 Years' War, the English laid siege to Calais just after the Battle of Crécy, the famous Battle of Crécy where the German longbow the English longbow absolutely destroyed the French army at Crécy.
That was Agincourt, wasn't it?
Yeah, but I think that was common throughout the war, that kind of two-fingered salute that the English archers showed to the French. That's where that comes from, because the French used to cut off the fingers so they couldn't fire the bow. Yeah. Apparently it used to take 15 years, to become a really good archer, and a longbow archer, and they could hit objects. They'd have like 4 arrows in the air before the first one hit, and just incredible skills. Yeah. But again, you put your heart to it or set your mind to it. And anyway, long story short, Edward III went to France against all advice and had this unbelievable victory at Crécy, where he fought himself, including the Black Prince. Now, Edward, I think his name was, the Black Prince, won every battle he ever went. It's like uncanny. Wherever he rocked up, he won. Yeah. He was one of them lucky guys. Napoleon always used to say about soldiers, didn't he? Is he lucky? Because if he's lucky, I can use him. Yeah. But anyway, Calais resisted for a year. They eventually surrendered, and the burghers, the powerful ones of Calais, come out with rope around their necks, symbolically, as if, we're completely surrendering.
And with the keys to the city on a plate as well.
And Edward was going to do what he was going to hang them, wasn't he? And apparently his wife said, let's show some mercy because you want to rule this kingdom eventually. And it was all over, like, going back a few generations. The English and the French were basically, and by the way, we used the word France. They didn't really call themselves French back then. If you were from Britain, you were a Breton. It wasn't really our modern idea of what France is. Is very much the way we look back at it. Apparently the 100 Years' War wasn't called the 100 Years' War for 400 years after the actual 100 Years' War as well. Yeah. So you get all these intricacies, but the Burghers of Calais, it's represented in Shakespeare as well as a key scene where Edward is convinced by his wife, I think it's Philippa of Hainault, to grant mercy as a gesture. And then of course, 114 years later, the issue was finally settled when I think Charles VII routed the English at a battle in the southwest of France. That the name escapes me, but it was where one of the key, I think it was Talbot, one of the key English knights, was killed in battle. Can't remember the name of the battle now, but it represented that the French were then going to, the whole idea of war had changed. The longbow was no longer the big issue. Yeah. And that was it. That was the 100 Years' War over. So that's Rodin.
So I would say that the burghers of Calais owed their lives to the Queen, who had
Philippa.
A word. What's her name? Philippa
of Hainault.
Had a word with the king to, say, show a bit of mercy. So that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. So Moulin Rouge. When you were back in Paris, you saw Moulin Rouge, which was an old cabaret that used to be quite controversial. Because the local... Do you remember we had a chat about this word, like what the word courtesan meant when we both went to see the play But anyway, we heard the word courtesan in a plane. Both of us like, what's that? But it was for an upmarket prostitute or someone who slept with people.
Well, it's usually the nobility, wasn't it? Hanging around the nobility.
Courtesans used to do this promiscuous dance called the can-can, sticking the legs up to the and then it became an entertainment in itself, the can-can. But that was originally its purpose to for the courtesans to try and get people to take a custom with them. I'm gonna have to think of what that play is. Sorry, what that book is, and it's the film with Michelle Pfeiffer and there's loads of impressive actors in it.
John Malkovich.
John Malkovich is in it as well, and it's one of my favourite films as well. I can't believe I forgot it. Dangerous Liaisons.
Yeah.
Dangerous Liaisons.
Yeah.
So the word courtesan is used in that. But it's now, they play musicals there, don't they? And it's quite a significant red building. Hence the rouge.
Yeah. So actually, Moulin, I don't know if anyone doesn't know what that means, but it actually means a mill, doesn't it?
Mill.
It's the red mill.
The red mill.
So it looks like a windmill, you can see it.
So they've got a windmill still there today.
Well, it's still a windmill to look at, isn't it?
So that's where maybe they preserved that was the site, because you get a lot of names of things, don't you, with these old farming terms because of what used to be there before they built on it, etc.
Yeah. Well, in actual fact, we just came across the Moulin Rouge on the way to... It's in Saint-Denis, isn't it? Which is where Sacré-Cœur is as well. Or Montmartre. Close, one of them two. So we actually just stumbled across it, on the way to Sacré-Cœur, Montmartre. And it was an opportunity, to get a couple of photographs outside. Being as though I used to watch them Moulin Rouge TV programs years ago with the girls dancing, doing the can-can. So it was nice to go and, put the actual location to the memories of it,
You then went to the bar where Amélie was filmed, the famous French film.
Yes, it was a little brasserie.
They are cool, those French cafes though, aren't they?
Yeah, so we had a little terrace outside, so we had a coffee outside. It was delightful it was really nice. It was when I went in to have a look around, I recognised the place instantly, because I don't think they hardly done any changes for the filming, because I remember the copper covered counter and the stools were like copper covers on them, and they used all that was in the film. Which was an excellent film, by the way. I would recommend that to anybody who wants to watch it.
But that was
nice. Had a couple of coffees. There was lots of tourists all in and out taking photographs. Some big Amélie fans. Audrey Tautou was the actress in the film, who went on to be, quite a famous French. She's done other films. That's her niche, isn't it? That kind of film. Like an obscure, unusual character she usually plays.
It is a good film. I watched it 20 years ago, so I wouldn't mind watching that again. But it's a nice little plot, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a cracking film. It's about 20 years old now, and I would recommend anybody watch that. So this is the actual cafe where they used to film it,
Cool. The French cafes, though, you've got to go there to kind of experience it. It's a bit like going to an Italian cafe. The way they do things, it's very cultured, even the cups, the smell in there, I don't know, they always smoke as well outside, don't they? Do you have a smoking ban indoors in Paris?
No smoking.
No smoking.
You can smoke in the terrace outside, of course.
They're all at it, aren't they, the French?
Yeah.
Cool. You also chanced upon a Roman amphitheatre. You just went down and chanced upon a Roman amphitheatre.
Yeah, well, I was with a friend who knew about it, and she said, there's not a lot of people who know about this place, actually. And she took me to it. Then she couldn't find it because we walked past it.
Yeah.
It's like in a door. You just open a door and walk down an entry, about 30 feet down an entry, and then you're walking literally right into a Roman amphitheatre. And you can see which is now used. People are just using it for walking the dogs, or I don't know. They might have an entertainment show on there sometimes. I don't know. A brass band or something in there. But it was like a little unknown secret in Paris, So that was nice to go and see that.
That's quirky, isn't it? Yeah. It's also when you think about the Paris Commune, because you went to Sacré-Cœur as well, as you said, it's a beautiful church. It was actually built where the Paris Commune was set up.
Yes.
In 1870.
With forced labour.
Yeah. And many people on the French left are like unhappy that they built this basilica, this special church on this site where these people rose up against the authorities on the back of the German invasion, or the Prussian invasion as it was. But Paris is a very revolutionary city going back. You know, they've set up different republics, they've had fresh starts as it were.
Yeah.
But the place where the revolution, when I went to Paris, I went to like see Rousseau's grave, and I was very much interested in the revolutionary history because it's a bit of an interest of mine as well. But there's so much history in Paris as well as the architecture and the culture. And as you say, you turn like chancing upon a Roman amphitheatre, etc.
Yeah.
Do you know what really shocked me was when I was in Tunisia. I went to a Roman amphitheatre called El Gem, near El Gem, and literally the place was just a poor town. And one thing that they say, travel broadens the mind. When I went to Tunisia, I couldn't believe how hard the local people worked for very little return. The economy was virtually non-existent.
Yeah.
This is before like the Arab Spring. I think 5 years before the Arab Spring. Yeah. This is like, you know, well long after the French have left, and it's one of the more successful countries in Africa, and I just couldn't believe how poor those people were. Well, I often hear people saying like, oh, people have this idea in Africa everyone's poor and all that, and you know, I'm not saying that it's the same everywhere, but the average Tunisian, they work extremely hard with very little, and they had no shame, but they come out trying to sell you stuff because they were desperate. They were saying, you know, we need you to buy stuff from us. But anyway, I went to this place called El Gem. I'll get to my point. And this Roman amphitheatre rose. Yeah. Nothing else was there. It was very, you know, sparsely populated, very small buildings, and then this huge Roman amphitheatre. And then the juxtaposition there is you've got an old site of an amphitheatre in Paris, which is sunk below everything else, which is grown up around it. Yeah. And it just shows the contrast between different places because of economy and location, etc., and politics.
Well, I think, you know, Tunisia, which is where Carthage was, isn't it?
Yeah.
They had an uphill battle, didn't they? Being as though the Romans absolutely wiped the place out, didn't they? You know, they wanted it off the face of the map. Yeah. So they done a good job on it as well. So coming back from that must have taken a bit of doing.
Absolutely. I think, I mean, we were into Carthage in a big way about 20 years ago. We've read a lot about the Punic Wars and spoken about it. But when I went to Carthage, have you been to the site?
I haven't been, no. I want to go.
There was American war graves there as well, big war graves for American soldiers in Tunisia. But I went around the Sahara, went to where like Star Wars was filmed. The Sahara's beautiful, went camel riding, and seeing the dunes go off into the distance is quite a scene. Endless dunes. But going to Carthage, as you say, the Romans destroyed the place. They put salt down.
Yeah, into the soil.
So no one could grow. And what they did to the Carthaginians, what they did to the civilians after the war as well, it was just absolutely shocking. But they were brutal times. But as you say, you wonder about the impact of something like that in the long term and its impact. Although I think that when the European powers started to show an interest in Africa, I think that was the decisive factor in setting them back as the African continent back as a place where people were not in control of their own destiny. You know, South America has had independence for 200 years now. The Africans, you know, some of those states, you know, just a few decades really, haven't they, since the end of empire, etc. You had some Ethiopian food as well, didn't you? Abyssinian food in Paris. What was that like? Because I don't think I've ever sampled that kind of thing.
Yes, well, I've never sampled that kind of thing myself either, so it was come as a bit of a surprise. Just thought I'd give it a try. We were looking for a restaurant, and we seen the Ethiopian restaurant. So when we went in, chatted to the guy, it was specifically North Abyssinian food, you know, specific, which is very spicy. Yeah. So what you're getting really is you're getting your chicken or beef or lamb or pork, and then it's just a question of all the flavourings. And well, it was absolutely delicious too. It was delicious. And I'd recommend that to anybody. The only thing I would say with the bread, I didn't really get on with the bread. It wasn't the right texture for me, you know. It was like blubbery or something. But I think that's their culture in the way they have it, you know. So, but I had it, like, it was very nice. But it just, you know, change the bread if
but bring your own bread next time.
Yeah, everything else was fantastic in there.
Just finally as well, you went to Dublin recently where your brother, my uncle, lives, and I can tell you a few stories about Dublin myself, like when we played five-a-side in the prison with the lifers, which was quite interesting. That's another story entirely, but you actually went to a famous prison in Dublin. What was that called?
Kilmainham Prison, it was called.
And your name is Tom Clark, and you actually... Did you go to the cell or just see the monument for Thomas Clark, who was one of the leaders of the 1916 Easter Uprising?
Yeah, well, we had the tour. We had the tour of the prison is now a museum. It hasn't seen a prisoner since 1924, but there was executions, regular executions in that deal. They had a courtyard and it's marked by a holy cross. There's actually two crosses. There's the main place where the 99% of people who were shot on that spot, and you can see the cross that represents where they used to stand. But at the other end of the courtyard, there's a smaller cross, which made me think, what's that doing there? So I asked the lady, and I think she was about to explain it anyway. She was saying, there's a famous guy called Connolly. I don't know if you know his name. James Connolly, who they actually took out of his hospital bed. He was badly injured. Took him out of his hospital bed in the city and drove him to Kilmainham. But he was too ill to make it up to the wall, the other end of the courtyard. So he just tied him to a chair, just inside the door, at the other end of the courtyard. And pumped him, shot him.
I've heard that story.
So he's the only one in that particular spot. Everybody else was killed at the other end of the yard, where the main cross is. Thomas Clark was a few days before Connolly. So that was quite poignant as well. They were all getting... the Republicans were being facing firing squads and everything.
There's still you can still see bullet holes on the bank, can't you?
Well, actually the wall behind where the guys used to stand, they would fill it with sandbags there. And that apparently was because sometimes the bullets would ricochet back and hit the soldiers who were firing. So they had to put sandbags there. Yeah. I thought it might have been something to do with looking after the prisoner, but then I thought, no, that's
the prisoners are like that. Thanks for the sandbags, when we get shot, we can fall back on them, which is nice and soft.
And a few of the soldiers got hurt, doing that. So that's what they used to do, put the sandbags up there.
That's nice of them, isn't it? Yeah. Ironically, they could have done with Philip of Hainault in that prison, because it was the draconian response by the British authorities. There's the cross there for James Connolly. It was the draconian response, or the harsh, brutal response, that actually galvanised the nationalist movement at the time, because many Irish were like, we're not interested. They didn't really sympathise with the rebellion, and the way the British reacted led to more support for the idea of independence moving forward. And then, literally within a few years, the Irish Free State is set up, and then you've got Northern Ireland, Ulster, separate state, and the rest is...
But this particular prison, Tim, Kilmainham, I don't think I've ever seen anything that looked so much like a grotty, dim dungeon, and it was dim anyway. It was no electric, by the way. By then, it was lit by gaslight, wasn't it? Which was all turned out to pitch black overnight, overnight. But some of the doors and the iron, the sliding locks and the padlocks and all the rest of it, it looks really old and like medieval. Looks like medieval stuff, And I can only imagine what it was like to spend time in there.
Yeah. But I read it recently as well, like people like Wolfe Tone, who wanted independence. He's gone back a couple of centuries now, but he was a Protestant. There was actually some Protestants who said, no, we need Ireland to run itself, separate to the British government. And many people think, oh no, Protestants are pro-British. Not entirely the case historically, and many people think, oh yeah, all the Catholics were pro-nationalist. In 1916, no one was bothered about the uprising. It was only the British response that kind of led to what happened later. And you had the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, fighting back against the British control of Ireland. Then you got the Troubles when they started up in the 60s. I mean, when we were young, particularly when you were young, the news was just full of, bombs and killing in Northern Ireland, etc.
Yeah, it was awful.
And then you've got the Good Friday Agreement in '98. wow, that's going to be here for a few hundred years, that's it, and then Brexit's completely reopened that can of worms, and it's very much modern relevant in the news now, isn't it, the whole Irish situation?
Yes, it is. It is, because they're inextricably linked to us, trade and culture and everything, isn't it? The links between the two countries. It's going to be difficult to change
Apparently,
all that.
they're doing really well, because they're benefiting from being in the EU and from being in the UK. Apparently, they're doing well, but the DUP aren't happy, and the Conservatives have said they're going to go against the rules that they signed 2 years ago. But it just goes to show how these things come right up to the present moment, don't they?
Yeah.
Tom, been a pleasure, and we'll talk about more. If you're interested in the history side, but also the travelling history, I'm not making out that I'm particularly well travelled, etc. But if you're interested in this kind of thing, let me know, and I can get other people on who can talk about places they've been to, not just in terms of history, but just in terms of general interest, really. But Tom, thanks, because I learned a lot speaking to you about that tour of France, because there's loads of places I've never been to, but also that prison has eluded me when I've been to Dublin a few times, because I've done quite a few bits and bobs in Dublin, but that's eluded me.
Well, actually, I forgot to mention, Tim, that there was a couple of films that the prison actually featured in as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know if we can put this in. And one of them being In the Name of the Father, with Daniel Day-Lewis, and the other one was the Michael Collins film.
With
Michael
Collins,
Liam Neeson,
Yeah.
Should have mentioned them before.
Do you know what? I spoke to an Irish nationalist not long ago. He was like, a Republican, believes in a united Ireland and all that. And he hated Michael Collins for signing the treaty that gave Ulster, Northern Ireland to...
Yeah, well, certain people regarded him as a turncoat, didn't he? Or
doing that,
but I just think he was in a tough situation. He's got to go one way or the other, hasn't he? No matter what way he goes, he's going to get criticised. So,
in many ways, he was the Boris Johnson of the nationalist movement, although with far more integrity.
I don't think he'd appreciate that comparison.
No, Michael Collins mightn't.
No, that's what I mean. Michael Collins and Boris.
But no, if you think about it, Michael Collins went to London and said, I'm going to have to sign something to get us some of Ireland, so Ulster can go to the north.
He done what he thought was best, didn't he?
And you've got Boris, who goes over and says, right, I've said I've got a deal ready to go, which I haven't. Complete useless oath. And just comes up with absolutely nothing.
Oven ready.
Oven ready, indeed. But yeah, there you go, Michael Collins. Sorry for the comparison with Boris Johnson. He'll be turning in his grave.
Yeah.
But yeah, check out that film, Michael Collins. I tried to buy a good book about the Irish uprising, the Irish Civil War recently, but with a youngster, it's very hard to find time to read. And but there's a lot of good stuff out there in terms of places to visit, people to speak to, and I just want to urge listeners, speak to the people in your family about their history, where they've been. If necessary, record it, write it down, because I think, Tom, you said you wish you'd have spoken more about the war with your parents now.
Yeah, I do, especially my dad.
Yeah.
Like in his battles and that.
Yeah, well, I recorded an interview with him in 2001, and the tape chewed up. It was on an old tape. But I've actually got a very short series of interviews with me nan in here, which this week.
I've heard them
on Facebook, and I'm waiting for it to come up in my memories, because I'm going to try and extract the audio, because as far as I'm aware, they're the only recordings of me nan that we now have.
Okay.
Because the original tape chewed up with her on as well. So
yeah, I'd like to spoke to my dad a bit more about more about where he was first posted and how long he was there for. Not so much like what it was like in battle, so much, and laying mines and all the rest of it, but just about where he was first and what division he was in, or what I'd like to be able to follow, actually. Yeah, I know he was 8th Army, wasn't he? His Montgomery's 8th Army. But other than that, I don't know what division or what I'd like to know where his movements were over the couple of years that he was there. I know he went right across North Africa, didn't he, and then back again. Got chased across Africa and then came back again.
But it's an interesting story, because there's that old picture of him at the pyramids and that. And,
yeah, always got photographs of the pyramids there, yeah, in 1942, I think.
That interview in 2001 as well, he wasn't as clear as he used to be. And I remember thinking, I wish I'd have got this earlier. But again, within a generation or two, things are forgotten. And people out there record your family history, speak to people like my Uncle Frank's got a family tree, he does on my dad's side, Claire's got a family tree, my sister, which she did quite extensively. A bit more, well, obviously from our side a little bit more, but they are very interesting, these things, and even in your own town there's so much history. I did like a history tour around Liverpool a few years ago, about our links with the South during the American Civil War and all that, because we were pro-slavery. Well, many people in Liverpool were pro-slavery because of the huge wealth that was coming into the port, but it's all out there, folks. But Tom, thanks very much for your time.
I've enjoyed it, Tim. Thanks a lot. I've learned a few things myself as well, actually, so that's great. Thanks a lot.
No worries, anytime. And those people out there, if you've got any good history, I'd like to speak to people who are experts in the Blitz as well, because I want to go to the place where, you know, those people, 200 people died in the shelter down in Kirkdale. I'd like to go to that site. Apparently there's a little memorial there. But I'd like to find out more about that. I think I did all my stuff at the start, folks, but follow me on Spotify, Twitter, like, subscribe, share, join the party, and have a great day. See you later.